On this episode of History on Lowell, we'll be talking about Lowell's 200-year celebration. Welcome to History in Lowell. I'm Maritza Grooms. I'm joined by my personal professor. Even though he's retiring soon, he will always be my personal professor, Bob Forrant. How you doing, Bob?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right.
Good.
Today, we're talking about our beloved Mill City.
Yes, we are.
And 200 years in 2026.
Yes.
Wow, can't
just
believe
around
it.
the corner.
You know, I was there. No.
Well, my students think I was. So there you go. They think I was around during World War I. So
it's only because you know so much about it.
Maybe. But I think they just think I'm old at this point. But yeah, so 1826, the official founding. There were people here before then. This was parts of what are now Lowell were Draken and Chelmsford.
Mm-hmm. Also farmland.
And farmland, orchards. Native people had been living here for centuries before. But 1820s, the people who ultimately come here, in the 1820s, they start a whole mill complex in Waltham on the Charles River. And they grow the mill to the point where the water power from the Charles, which is puny compared to our beloved Merrimack, it can't do the job. And so they look for another place, and they find the two falls that are now in Lowell proper. And basically Lowell basically is started as like a secret, almost like espionage. They basically, the moneyed power in Boston doesn't want to let farmers around here know that they're interested in industrializing the area. They want to buy the land, but if the farmers know the mills might be coming, they're afraid they'll jack up the price of their land because now they know it has great value to somebody else.
These guys already had money.
And they already have money. Yeah, I mean they've made a boatload of money on shipping, trading, and one of the things they trade is human beings. And they scout and find the falls and very quietly buy up land. There's also already the Middlesex Canal, which has been built by moneyed interest from Newburyport, who are using the canal way as a way to ship goods, particularly lumber, to Newburyport, which is building boats. And so some of the infrastructure is here already that they need. Yeah. And then all of a sudden they basically launch through legislation from Boston, the city of Lowell.
Wow. And these guys, we see their names all through our streets, even to this day.
Still there. So yeah, the Lowells, the Lawrences, the Cabots, just the whole collection, extended families, big, huge families, Appletons. You also see them at Harvard. If you walk through Harvard Yard, every other building seems like it has a name on it.
Oh my gosh.
Then when you look at it, it's like, wait, isn't there a street in Lowell or Lawrence that's... Because the founders of Lowell eventually are going to help to found Lawrence in 1845.
Our sister city. Yeah.
So the city basically is launched in secret. And still on the other side where I live in Centerville, that's still part of Dracut initially. And then that as we grow, the downtown grows and whatnot, then they kind of start coveting Dracut. And getting a bunch of that land, and then they start spreading up what's Bridge Street now.
Wow. Every time we go back to really the founding of Lowell, I try to picture it and put myself, in different places in Lowell and see just what was happening here. So you got the canals being dug out, you got the mill buildings being built, you got all of the lumber that was moving, and the railroad going on. There's so much industry happening in Lowell, for better or for worse, right? And here we are 200 years later.
Yeah, wow. and a lot of because of obviously for us, because we love the history, the fact that the national park came in when it did, a lot of other cities like similarly situated in the 1970s were basically tearing down their history because they felt as though the history was constraining some other great leap forward. And that was the fairly predominant opinion in Lowell as well. I mean, there was definitely a crowd that was saying the mill buildings are holding us back until we basically make a clean break. And so nobody's thinking, okay, 200th birthday or whatever, right? They're in it. And in the 1970s, people are thinking, yeah, maybe. And so a lot of stuff does get torn down. There are a lot of places where if you look at an old atlas map of the city, of which there are many in the Center for Lowell History, you can see how many more mill buildings there were. And even like now, if you drive around, think there are quite a few. There were probably more than double.
Wow.
At what's still left up. Some of it got burned down in fires,
right?
Which predate the idea of urban renewal and taking things down. Some of it is purposeful, like the Merrimack Mills, which are one of the major complexes right in the heart of the city, are now where the Songus Arena is and Lasher Park and that whole area over there. Those were purposely taken down in the early 60s. And again, that was the idea that people had to basically do that. And then, along the way, there started to be a debate about preserving or not the history, and would there be a way to potentially capitalize on the history? Because while there was one argument, the history is an impediment to growth, there was another argument that, wait, can't we maybe be, like some kind of a historical park, a state park, a national park? And the Commonwealth of Massachusetts is in the 70s and 80s thinking about heritage parks. And so there are a lot of heritage parks, and Lowell actually has a heritage park at one point that's a state park.
Right, yeah.
And there are several heritage parks around. There's one in Lawrence, there's one in Fitchburg. They're in several different communities, one in Holyoke, where I lived for quite a while. And so then the federal government kind of came in, and people lobbied Congress, and eventually a collection of people got together and pushed through legislation. This was when Paul Songus was in the Senate,
right, yep.
And got enabling legislation for there to be a national park. And it's one of the few that's urban.
Yeah.
Obviously, usually when you think national park, you think like the Grand Canyon or the Rocky Mountains or some big nature thing.
Yellowstone.
Yeah, right, exactly,
yeah.
But not. And I mean, Philadelphia, obviously, for reasons of the Continental Congress and all that stuff. So yeah. So it's interesting too that Lowell is doing 200 when we're also in 1776 and the Declaration of Independence, and we're sort of like on anniversaries of all of these things as well. Yeah. So it's an interesting. 2026 will be an interesting history year.
I mean, we're talking about preserving history. We're celebrating all of these giant milestones of our nation and of our little city. But what are the implications right now in this moment as we're trying to celebrate history, but history is being wiped away, as just like during urban renewal, right? Only it's figurative and some literal things are happening across the board. What does it look like to preserve history in this moment?
Yeah, it is. There is a challenge to try to navigate the current sort of emphasis, I think, on telling what I think of as a very homogenized kind of white milk story of America and by implication other places in the country, and to really dilute and water down the history. And so the idea of pushing to purge things from the Library of Congress or the Smithsonian and pushing back on exhibits that talk about things like slavery or the way immigrants were treated, things like that in the past, that really, it's interesting because I was talking to somebody about this the other day too. When I started college back in the 60s, it's a long time ago, obviously, but in 1969, 1970, 1971, we were fighting, myself and other students in Boston and elsewhere in the country, were fighting to have civil rights history taught, black history more generally taught, women's history taught, labor history taught, because they were devoid in the curriculum. And they were connected to all the other sort of student movements spinning off from the Vietnam War and protests against the war and the civil rights movement. People in academia, particularly young students, were demanding like more of this history be taught. And I was talking to somebody again the other day, as well as on my students, and saying it's ironic that now that I'm sort of finishing a career, I'm actually now fighting to make sure the stuff that I was trying to fight to get into the curriculum stays in the curriculum. All these long years later. We're talking about 1970 and 2025. So 55 years later, if my math skills are any good, I'm basically trying to advocate that things that I wanted in the curriculum in 1970 stay in the curriculum in 2025.
Oh my gosh.
And it is kind of unnerving to sort of imagine that. That's not happening at the university. I don't want to imply in any way that people are saying we can't teach what we want to teach. But in a lot of colleges and universities in the country, that's definitely happened. People are being let go. People are being terminated because they're crossing a line that you shouldn't be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. You shouldn't be talking about transgender history. There's like a whole like set of these are words you can't say.
Yeah.
And so fortunately, again, in the Commonwealth, that I can't imagine that. I mean, if it happened here, then we would really be on the last rungs of something. So that's not happening. Like nobody, I mean, I can say, and I'm happy for, in all my time at the university, nobody has ever said you can't use that book or you can't teach that topic. And I don't know of anybody who ever, in the recent past, has had that happen to them. In the 1950s, there were faculty fired during the Cold War from Lowell Textile Institute for supposed communist leanings.
Wow.
We're talking about the 40s and the 50s, but not in the recent past, and certainly not since I've been there.
And sometimes I do think, like, what would this time be referred to as if we look at like the 40s and 50s as, the times of the Red Scare and all of those things? What is this time as we're trying to really combat fascism? Because only a fascist would say, you can't teach the true history of all of the people that represent a place. And I'm really grateful for people like you, Bob, because I think that as we don't talk about only just the Mill Girls, right, who are an important part of Lowell's history. We talk about the Underground Railroad here. We talk about the abolitionist movements. We talk about the various immigrant groups who have come in and built our beautiful city. And I really think that there is something so important about how we have uplifted all of those groups, all of these underrepresented groups who made Lowell what it is today. And as all of these groups are being targeted currently by this administration, and even by individual actors who just don't know. Sometimes if you don't know the history, you don't understand what's actually happening and how you're being fed propaganda. But the more that you learn, the more that you're able to advocate on behalf of other people and build something that is a much better society than one that restricts your freedom of speech and your ability to learn greatly, and be able to pass on that information to other people.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, the 200th for Lowell creates the space, if we use it wisely, to really teach that. Because everything that's complicated about U.S. history happened in Lowell. In its own sort of specific kind of a way, be it, people going off to war, or be it, the struggles around public education and public higher education, or how various immigrant and refugee groups come into a community and make their way, the business community and everything associated with the mills, but as well with, small businesses, locally owned businesses started by immigrants, refugees, asylees, like everything that's good, I think, about the history of the country and people being able to make their way has happened in Lowell, as well as the downside of those things. And
Right.
so we have an opportunity in the year to basically say, look, this, like, we've got everything here. And we can show, in a way, Lowell can, through the lens of the 200th, essentially show the country the vibrancy of the communities and then history, the back and forth. Everything about Lowell is everything about America. And so it's really hopefully people will realize that and will be able to take advantage of the teachable sort of opportunities. And obviously, since I'm a teacher, that's what I'm looking for. And I feel like the same way in 2012, we were doing the 100th anniversary of the Bread and Roses strike.
Right.
And I worked really hard on that. And that was an opportunity to sort of think back and look at 100th anniversary. So what was the strike about, but what did it mean? What's its legacy? So you can do the same thing with, look through another lens. The other day with second graders, I brought in a kaleidoscope. And so I was thinking about when they were looking through it, in a way, when you put that up to your eyeball, think of Lowell at the end of it. And when you play around with it and get these different views, in a way, that's what you're doing, depending on the decade that you drop yourself into.
Yes.
Right? And so our friend Ingrid, who's written a book about Lowell and Mr. Magnificent Magical Adventure and flying over the city in a balloon and kind of looking down. And so in a way, we need to get her to expand it to be like a 200-year, ride in a balloon over different aspects, like drop down in the 1980s, drop down in the 1970s and urban renewal, drop down when Bertie Marbury is running for city council, all these different things, right? It would be really cool to do something like that.
It'd be so cool. I love the idea of the kaleidoscope because that really, you need to shift your perspective. And not just the decades, but shift it from a person who is a newcomer to Lowell.
Yep.
What does that look like? A person who's been in the city council and local government for a long time. What does that look like? What's happening between these community groups and our local government at any given time? And who is fighting? And for what? What are they fighting for? And did they win?
Right.
And what are the ramifications of that today? That's what I want to see.
Yeah, I mean, and I think over like the summer and the early fall, I was working with Central Labor Council in Lowell on an exhibit on the labor history of the city, starting back with the young women in the mills and taking it up to today. And so we made 6 historical panels looking at the sweep of worker history in Lowell. And so I think as an example, I would love it, and I've been talking to people to figure out how we can make this happen. So if you're a city councilor and you're listening to this program, I'm speaking directly to you now, it would be great to have that exhibit in City Hall for a month. And so when anybody from the city comes in to do city business, city clerk's office, traffic office, assessor's office, to visit the mayor, to visit the city manager, whatever it would be, they'll bump into this exhibit of working people and their history in Lowell as an example of something that we could do. And so I'm hoping that those possibilities basically become reality in the calendar year. And the exhibits they're done. We did an exhibit, which you know about, for the International Institute when they were celebrating 100 years of settling immigrants and refugees in Lowell. That exhibit could, again, be one of these things that could be put up somewhere in the city for a period of time, because it does the sweep from 1912. It does 100 of the 200 years. And it's there and it's done. And then you could build all these other events off of that history. So hopefully that will happen. I mean, there's a lot of history written, all these books that anybody viewing can see. This is just a little bit of the books in my house on Lowell.
I think I still have a few.
I stopped because the bag got too heavy and I didn't want to fall down my stairs on ice and break my hip. But there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of stories that people have already researched, written in really terrific ways that could be made more apparent for more people in the city. I keep thinking of like little book groups that read books about Lowell.
Yeah. Yep, there are definitely book groups happening at Lala Books, I know for sure, that talk about the history in Lowell. I'm thinking about the Many Cultures exhibit over at the Cultural Center. That's one of my favorite exhibits just because you can see the through line.
Yeah.
And that, I really hope that
And
gets highlighted.
that's got the complete 200 years.
Exactly.
Everything
That's got to
is
be
there.
highlighted for sure. I love the idea of having installations in City Hall where maybe every month, we can have a different installation of different types of history that happen, labor movements, immigration history, anything that we can think of.
Right.
And really, I mean, we have such a great selection of programs that they can pick from and build stuff off of.
And we're fortunate we have the National Park, we have the Center for Lowell History, we have the History Department at the university and all the people there that are expert on everything from Native American history to the American Revolution to the present day. All of that in collaboration can really, I think, it should be exciting for people that want to that care about history, but the idea I have is really to try to persuade people that they should care that don't.
Yeah.
And so we're not just reaching the same, like I can imagine doing something where I'll know everybody that's there. That's not what I want. I would want to see stuff where there's new people being exposed to the history of the city. I'm always taken by putting things in social media about some event in the city and then having like a whole bunch of people respond, oh yeah, my grandmother worked there, or my uncle was part of that, or like putting something up about Greek immigrants and then having a whole bunch of people send in bits and pieces about their story. A few years ago we were doing stuff on Little Canada and creating historical markers over in the area where the neighborhood was, and people sent me photographs of like their family in their backyard, like before their building was torn down.
Wow.
And things like that, which I scanned and then gave back. But like there's a trove of those things that are here, and we need to make that more public. I mean, the one thing that of all the things that I've been thinking about with this, the one thing that I think I wanted the city hopefully to showcase more than anything else is the role of women workers during World War II.
Yeah.
Because the more that doing the labor history exhibit, which I referred to a second ago, one of the things that I started doing is researching more on women making parachutes in Lowell. And more parachutes were made in Lowell than virtually any other place in the country.
Wow. What
during
a
the
huge
Second World
role.
War.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of photographs and a lot of personal stories. There's an archive of material that the park has, which I sat and really looked at for doing this exhibit, but way more could be done than what we could do on a single panel.
Right.
And that was one where people started saying, oh yeah, my grandmother worked there, or we even have badges, like the security badges that women had to wear. We have a bunch of those badges that have been preserved, and on the badges, the worker's number and a photograph. It doesn't have a name. And I would love to try to figure out how to figure out who the people are on the who's this, like on a milk carton. Who's this person? If you know who this person is, please, please
send them our way. Come and tell their story.
And really doing something to commemorate the role that those women workers played. Because again, when we think of women workers in Lowell, we do like what you said at the outset. We talk about the mill girls, and then we basically lose sight of the fact that women in Lowell are always working.
Yeah, I can tell you that for a fact.
And this is one moment where their labor is instrumental in helping to defeat fascism.
Yes.
And that's a story that needs to be told. On D-Day in Normandy, when we turn the tide, so to speak, it's people parachuting from the sky behind German lines in France that basically helped to knock the Germans out and push them back and ultimately win the war. And so you could say D-Day in many respects is a consequence of these women making parachutes in Lowell.
That's incredible. That's history to be proud of.
Yeah, and that's a story that people should know about. That's
Yeah.
a story that should be marked somewhere, commemorated somewhere, and it's not anywhere in the city. So the 200th gives us the opportunity to find, I mean, I'm sure there are other stories that I'm just unaware of that other people are aware of, but this is the moment to sort of bring them forward,
Exactly.
take them out of your back closet, so to speak.
Yeah.
And
Get people excited.
yeah.
I want to see a mural of the parachutes and like one of the women, you know, that
that
would
be great.
So
that would be
cool.
great. And the funny thing is, again, that's like missed, and I didn't know this either, but Martha Mayo actually at one point texted me this. One of the women who was one of the lead people in making the parachutes, when the war was over, worked in other industry for many, many years before retiring. But in the 1980s, when the federal government was on the Mall in Washington, D.C., going to do a big monument to World War II, to the home front in World War II, the woman who is on the platform as the speaker is this woman from Lowell who was making parachutes.
Wow.
And and Martha sent me the link to something that was on C-SPAN on the day of the ribbon cutting to open the exhibit, and she's sitting there right next to Bill Clinton. And then she gets up and talks about what it was like on the home front during the Second World War.
Wow.
And like, that's nowhere.
That is insane. Like, that is so cool. There's so much more to like about Lowell
Yes.
than what we're given. And I think that this 200-year celebration is, like you said, it's an opportunity for us to really uplift the stories, not just the stories that we tell regularly, but the ones that don't get told. How do we pull new people in to care about this history? And we can relate it right to the past. When you care about the history, when you know what's going on, we can actually do things like combat fascism, like our lovely ladies in Lowell.
Yeah, you become a more responsible human being, I think, when you understand better the history of how we got to where we got and the rights that we have and the freedoms that we have. They came at a price, and if we don't know that, then we much too easily are willing to give them up, and that's a slippery slope.
It's too slippery, and I don't want to think about us both breaking our hips on that kind of.
Yeah, that's the wrong slippery slope.
No,
yes.
let's not go. And so that's why we still do our show. That's why we still do this. That's why people should care about history. And there's going to be so many exciting things hopefully happening next year in 2026.
Yeah, there will for sure.
Look forward to all of those events. We're going to be celebrating 200 years of history here with me and Bob in the city of Lowell. There will be so many things to do, and we'll be looking for you to be watching History in Lowell. Thank you for tuning in.